The blood, the money, the code, the silence. We are told that Silicon Valley is a pantheon of benevolent creators, building a digital utopia, connection by connection. They want you to look at the shiny interfaces. They want you to look at the seamless transactions. They want you to look at the illusion of a democratized global community, so you do not see the architecture of the cage being built around you. But there is a man who does not believe in the utopia. He believes in a different world, a world without democracies, and where corporations rule the world. The trajectory of Peter Thiel, from his early childhood displacements to his emergence as the undisputed don of the Silicon Valley elite, represents one of the most competent, yet evil, businessmen in modern venture capitalism. He is not merely a financier. He is not merely a founder. He is a man with unimaginable wealth, slowly eroding away at democracy, building a future he himself envisions. A world where corporations rule America like a business. A contrarian worldview that seeks to use technology to create a new society free from rules, regulations, and taxes. While the rest of the tech world is playing within the bounds of society, Thiel is quietly building the way out of society. He is the shepherd offering a very different kind of salvation, one where the meek do not inherit the earth, but are left behind to rot by a newly consecrated elite. A figure who mimics the Saviour to build an opposing kingdom has a specific name. Enter Peter Thiel, the Antichrist. Chapter 1. End of Beginning. The wilderness does not test you to see if you are good. It tests you to see if you will survive. Every dark theology requires an origin story of displacement, a moment where the Saviour is cast out into the desert. Peter Thiel was born on October 11, 1967, in Frankfurt am Main, West Germany, to Susanna and Klaus Friedrich Thiel. His family's migration to the United States when Peter was only 1 year old was the first in a series of relocations that would define his early life as one of an outsider. While the family initially settled in Cleveland, Ohio, Klaus Thiel's career as a chemical engineer for various international mining companies necessitated a life of constant relocations. By the age of 10, Thiel had attended 7 different elementary schools across several continents. When a child is constantly uprooted, they do not learn to trust the soil. They learn to trust only themselves. This perpetual displacement forced an early development of extreme self-reliance and an independent mindset, a psychology predisposed to challenge established norms rather than seeking to fit in. Classmates remembered Thiel as a smart but withdrawn boy who did not mingle much and often seemed bored. To cope, he gravitated toward mathematics and competitive chess, where strategy and individual intellect were the only things that mattered. The most intellectually significant stop in this global journey, the true baptism in the wilderness, occurred in the mid-1970s. The Thiel family lived in South Africa and Southwest Africa, which is now Namibia, while Klaus Thiel worked at the Rosing uranium mine near Swakopmund. You can almost feel the grit of the Namibian sand, the oppressive heat, the mechanical grind of heavy machinery extracting power from the earth. This environment was characterized by intense, suffocating disciplinary structures. Peter attended a strict German-language school that utilized mandatory uniforms and corporal punishment. But this early encounter with physical and institutional regimentation served as the primary catalyst for Thiel's later libertarianism. He later reflected that this harsh, highly regimented experience instilled a lifelong distaste for uniformity and collective norms. He also immersed himself heavily in science fiction and fantasy literature, particularly the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. These stories provided a narrative framework through the idea of individual heroism struggling against overwhelming, mechanistic collective forces, themes he would later use to name his companies, such as Palantir, Mithril, and Valar Venture. Thiel's childhood in southern Africa coincided with the late stages of apartheid rule. Furthermore, the social and political context of Swakopmund during the 1970s was extreme. The town was noted for its continued glorification of Nazism. The environment he grew up in was one of stark contrasts. At the Rosing mine, white managers lived in neo-colonial luxury, while black laborers endured dire, dangerous working conditions. His proximity to this deeply stratified society shaped his awareness of power structures and political systems. This period fostered a worldview where institutional morality was often secondary to technical or industrial development, a perspective that would manifest in his later critiques of liberal democracy. Later, as an undergraduate student, Thiel drew sharp criticism when he allegedly bragged to classmates that apartheid works and was an economically sound system. According to the biography The Contrarian, he argued that moral issues were irrelevant because South Africa was more developed than its neighbors. Though Thiel has since denied ever supporting apartheid, growing up amid such immense privilege and a rigid racial hierarchy led some within that society to view their status not as the result of systemic oppression, but as the natural order of things earned through their own abilities. While the young Thiel was shielded from many of these harsh realities. Chapter 2: Lone Pawn. To build a new world, one must first learn to manipulate the old one. When the Thiels finally settled in Foster City, California, in 1977, the physical wandering ended, but the intellectual isolation solidified. The smell of the ocean air, the hum of the burgeoning Silicon Valley. It was here, at Stanford University, that he excelled in mathematics, scoring first in a California-wide competition while attending Bowditch Middle School. But numbers alone were not enough. He needed a battlefield. The transition from his individual intellectual development into public ideological warfare fundamentally shaped his lifelong political activism and worldview. His experiences navigating the campus culture wars, combined with his philosophical studies, forged his contrarian mindset and provided him with the network he would later use to exert massive influence over American politics. His absolute mastery of chess complemented this mathematical aptitude. For a boy who trusted no institution, chess provided a contained universe where strategy and individual intellect were the only relevant factors. There was no luck, there was no democracy, there was only the will to dominate. Thiel achieved the rank of national master, eventually ranking 17th in the US Open in the year 2000. The influence of chess on Thiel's later business philosophy is profound, an omnipresent shadow over his every move. He viewed the board not as a series of tactical trades, but as an endgame to be solved backward. This endgame philosophy would later inform his last mover advantage theory in venture capital, which posits that being the first to enter a market is less important than being the one who dominates it permanently. His style of play was described by opponents as merciless and ruthless. During his adolescence, Thiel immersed himself heavily in science fiction and fantasy literature. These genres provided a narrative framework for his burgeoning individualistic philosophy. His primary literary touchstones were J.R.R. Tolkien, Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, and Ayn Rand. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings was particularly influential. Thiel reportedly read the trilogy over 10 times. He identified strongly with the struggle of individual heroism against overwhelming mechanistic collective forces, a theme that perfectly mirrors his later opposition to stifling government bureaucracy and social uniformity. The naming of his various companies, Palantir, Valar Ventures, Mithril Capital, and Rivendell LLC, serves as a literal ritualistic manifestation of these Tolkienian concepts in the realm of high finance. At San Mateo High School, where he graduated as valedictorian in 1985, Thiel's worldview was further refined by the Reagan-era climate of optimism and anti-communism. Chapter 3: The Reach of Consciousness. To control the sheep, one must first understand the nature of their bleating. Thiel's entry into Stanford University in 1985 marked the transition from individual intellectual formation to public ideological warfare. At Stanford, beneath the imposing arches and the manicured lawns, Thiel encountered two transformative forces: the philosophy of René Girard and the burgeoning campus culture wars. Girard's mimetic theory provided Thiel with a dark lens through which to view human behavior. The theory posited that human desire is not original, but inherently imitative. Humans blindly imitate the desires of others. This blind imitation leads to destructive rivalries and the endless rat race of competition. Thiel applied this cold calculus to his observation of elite institutions, noting that the more intelligent individuals are, the more they tend to compete for the same narrow, shared goals, thereby stifling true innovation. He saw the student body not as independent thinkers, but as a herd trapped in a cycle of envy. And a herd can be directed. The immediate catalyst for Thiel's activism was the university's decision to replace its traditional Western culture curriculum with a culture, ideas, and values program that emphasized diversity and multiculturalism. Thiel viewed this not as an educational expansion, but as a tendentious left-wing anti-Western crusade that explicitly prioritized victimhood over excellence. In 1987, armed with funding from Irving Kristol, Thiel co-founded the Stanford Review, a conservative and libertarian student newspaper. As the paper's first editor-in-chief, Thiel used the publication to provide an alternative viewpoint to what he termed institutionalized liberalism. The review was explicitly designed to stir the pot and challenge the prevailing campus orthodoxy, often using provocative devil's advocate reporting to surface unpopular thoughts. This period marked the beginning of Thiel's career-long strategy of using provocative verbal cues to attract a network of highly capable, like-minded individuals. Chapter 4: Power begets power. Paper burns, gold melts. Only the ledger is eternal. After graduating from Stanford Law School in 1992, Thiel briefly attempted to navigate the traditional elite professional path. He served as a judicial law clerk for Judge James Larry Edmondson of the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. He then worked as a securities lawyer for Sullivan and Cromwell in New York. He found the legal profession to be a never-ending rat race. He famously quit the firm in under a year, later remarking that from the outside, everyone wanted to get in, but from the inside, everyone wanted to get out. Thiel returned to California in 1996. His time at Credit Suisse was particularly formative, as it exposed him to the mechanics of global finance and the wholesale madness of market bubbles. He raised $1 million from friends and family to establish Thiel Capital Management. His initial investment was a $100,000 bet on a web-based calendar project by his friend Luke Nosek, which failed. The founding of Confinity in December 1998 by Thiel, Max Levchin, and Luke Nosek was originally centered on developing security software for handheld devices like Palm Pilots. However, when they realized there was little market demand for this, they pivoted to an application that allowed Palm Pilot users to beam IOUs and money to one another. This concept soon evolved into a much simpler program that allowed money to be transferred via email, launching as the product PayPal in late 1999. Thiel's agenda for PayPal was profoundly libertarian and anti-statist. He viewed the mission as liberating people from the erosion of the value of their currencies due to inflation. In a seminal speech in 1999, Thiel declared that everyone in the world needs money, but that paper money is an ancient technology and an inconvenient means of payment. He prophesied that it would be nearly impossible for corrupt governments to steal wealth from their people, because if they try, the people will switch to dollars or pounds or yen. This vision of PayPal as a new world currency was deliberately designed to undermine the nation-state's monopoly on monetary policy. By creating a borderless digital currency, Thiel hoped to empower individuals to bypass government-controlled financial institutions. He was offering a new monetary standard that had no borders, an early idea of Bitcoin, but without the anonymity that Bitcoin offered. The eventual sale of PayPal to eBay in 2002 for $1.5 billion provided the massive capital that would fund Thiel's next phase of ideological influence. The friction with eBay's corporate bureaucracy was inevitable. The original PayPal team struggled to integrate into eBay's bureaucratic corporate culture. Within 4 years, almost all of the original founders and early employees had left the company. The media, always desperate for a digestible narrative, dubbed them the PayPal Mafia, a comforting mobster trope that masks a much more terrifying reality. Chapter 5: The Kingdom of Heaven. The apocalypse is not a fire from the sky, it is the slow, suffocating stagnation of the human spirit. Following the PayPal exit, Thiel's agenda shifted towards systemic intellectual influence and the absolute destruction of traditional capitalism. Through the founding of Palantir Technologies in 2003 and Founders Fund in 2005, he institutionalized his belief in zero-to-one innovation, the creation of something entirely new rather than the incremental improvement of existing technologies, which he termed 1 to N. Thiel argues with terrifying clarity that competition is for losers. He fundamentally believes that perfect competition and capitalism are actually opposites. In a perfectly competitive market, companies sell undifferentiated commodities and are forced to sell at the market price. As a result, companies have to fight ruthlessly just to survive, and in the long run, all economic profits are completely competed away. To actually create and capture lasting value, Thiel argues that a business must avoid competition entirely and establish a monopoly, which allows it to set its own prices and maximize profits. He doesn't want to compete. He doesn't want to share. He doesn't want to participate in the mimetic war of the masses. When a business is trapped in a competitive ecosystem, it becomes hyper-focused on daily survival and maintaining razor-thin margins, making it impossible to plan for the distant future. In contrast, earning monopoly profits gives a company the financial security required to take big risks and fund groundbreaking innovation. The Enlightenment assumption that human nature is rational and that the world is moving inevitably toward a peaceful, liberal consensus. He suggests that liberal democracy is merely an ineffective divertissement that hides real problems like scientific stagnation and the threat of irrational actors. His agenda has increasingly focused on definite optimism, the belief that humanity can engineer a better future through breakthroughs in hard technology like aerospace, defense, and biotechnology. He actively contrasts this with what he perceives as the nihilistic or indeterminate optimism of modern society, which relies on the lottery of globalization rather than specific planning. He pursues an exit from collective, uniform, or decaying systems, whether through private space exploration, seasteading, or life extension. Palantir Technologies represents his most ambitious application of technology to global geopolitics and ideology. Thiel named the company after the Palantir, the magical seeing stones. These stones allowed users to see events across vast distances, but they came with a warning. They could distort the truth and be corrupted if used by those lacking a moral compass. This reflects Thiel's philosophical view of surveillance technology as a morally neutral tool. Palantir's very first financial backer was the CIA's venture capital arm, In-Q-Tel. Today, the company secures multi-billion-dollar contracts with the Pentagon, the NSA, and ICE. Recently, Palantir's AI software has been deeply integrated into the Ukrainian government's wartime operations, where it is responsible for military targeting, analyzing drone and satellite footage, collecting evidence of war crimes, and assisting with mass demining efforts. Chapter 6: A New World. The most frightening thing about the architect wasn't the blood he spilled, it was that the blueprint was perfect. The cognitive and professional development of Peter Thiel reveals a man who has prioritized the sovereignty of the heroic individual over the democratic mass since he was a displaced child in the Namibian desert. He uses capital not merely to generate profit, but to build a parallel infrastructure of technology that can survive what he views as the coming collapse of the Western world. Peter Thiel's political worldview is rooted in a highly contrarian, libertarian ideology that is deeply skeptical of modern democratic systems. Driven by the belief that technological progress is being stifled by government regulation and mass consensus, Thiel actively advocates for the creation of new, autonomous societies where technological innovation and corporate governance replace traditional representative democracy. Declaring, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible," he argued that capitalist democracy had become an oxymoron, pointing to the expansion of the welfare state and the extension of the franchise to women as developments that made the electorate notoriously hostile to libertarian ideals. In Thiel's view, mass democracy inevitably leads to a tyranny of the majority that demands wealth redistribution, impedes capitalism, and halts the kind of radical technological advancement he believes is necessary to save civilization. Because Thiel views the current political system as a stagnant rat race, where democratic processes cannot be fixed from within, he argues that the ultimate goal for libertarians is to find an escape from politics in all its forms. To achieve this, he focuses his efforts on funding new technologies that may create a new space for freedom. To physically realize a society ruled outside of democratic norms, Thiel became an early and primary funder of the Seasteading Institute, an organization dedicated to building permanent, floating, startup communities in international waters. The explicit goal of seasteading is to allow individuals to experiment with new legal, social, and political systems without the burden of 18th century government structures. When engineering challenges made ocean cities difficult to realize, Thiel shifted his focus to terrestrial, charter cities, and network states. He became the anchor backer of Pronomos Capital, a venture capital fund dedicated to establishing experimental, semi-autonomous cities in vacant lands hosted by developing nations, such as the Prospera project in Honduras. Governance by corporation, not constitution. In the societies Thiel envisions, the concept of a democratic nation-state is entirely replaced by a corporate model. These private cities operate through a social smart contract rather than a constitution, meaning there is no voting or representative government. Instead, citizens are treated as at-will consumers who voluntarily subscribe to a governance service provider. Power is highly centralized in the hands of a corporate board or a visionary founder, completely unburdened by liberal democratic procedures. Techno-monarchy and the sovereign individual. This worldview is heavily influenced by Thiel's belief that the most innovative and successful organizations function more like feudal monarchies led by an exceptional authoritarian founder who can plan decades ahead, whereas faceless democratic bureaucracies only make short-term plans. He is closely associated with neo-reactionary thinkers like Curtis Yarvin, who argue that democracies are wasteful and should be replaced by sovereign corporations ruled by a CEO monarch. Critics and political analysts describe Thiel's ultimate vision as a form of techno-feudalism. In this system, a super-wealthy elite of sovereign individuals successfully emancipates itself from the nation-state, residing in highly advanced, exclusive enclaves where they exercise total control over capital and code, while the rest of humanity is left behind. In this world, there is no true freedom, where the common people are subjects, where morality is replaced with efficiency and human life is disregarded in the name of profit. In that world, freedoms will be erased, personalities burned away, and what makes us human and the connection between the world will fade. And only emptiness will be over, and in it will be more pain and endless cycles of suffering. The most terrifying thing about Thiel isn't that he believes the world as we know it is ending. It is that he is slowly building what he thinks is the kingdom of heaven.